Did we just lose somebody? This is John DeMaine, the conductor. This is Michelle Lynch, choreographer. And Peter Davison, the set designer. Have a seat, everybody. I'm going to sort of sit. Fine, you can all sit. The director tells people what to do, then everybody calms down. So thank you very much for being here this afternoon. I just learned there's a parallel event that we're doing of a master class with Rodney Gilfrey. So this is the discussion. If you thought you were going to be at the master class for Rodney, that's in another part of the building. I don't know how we ended up scheduling two events at the same time on such a beautiful, beautiful Saturday afternoon. But thank you very much, everybody, for being here on Saturday afternoon. We appreciate it, and we hope that you'll spread the word to come to more of these. This is a kind of a look-in into Showboat and how its genesis here at the Kennedy Center. I'll lead off with a little bit of background and then turn it over to my colleagues who can tell you more about it. Showboat is a co-production with the Lyric Opera of Chicago and the San Francisco Opera. So we were in on it here from the beginning. It was something that I very much wanted to do as a director, but also to present here as part of our season. I think that it is, for me, the first American opera as well as the first American musical. And I think that it is a real synthesis of styles, music, dramatic, all kinds of sounds and stories are in this musical, and I think it is truly a magical piece, of course based on one of the great novels of American literature, Edna Ferber's Showboat, which is recommended reading for everyone in this room. I think it will enhance your enjoyment of the piece and also is an amazing look into American history from 1885 to 1920s. It is a very powerful story. I have a feeling I'm talking to people of the converted in this room. Everybody knows. Does everybody sort of know the piece? No. Okay, good. All right, good. Then we'll just briefly go over it for a second. Showboat basically follows a family who live on a showboat, the Cotton Blossom in Mississippi. The parents are Captain Andy and Parthy. They have a daughter, Magnolia. And the story really is Magnolia's story. The other characters on the boat are Joe and Queenie, who are the African-American help on the boat, and Frank and Ellie, who are the sort of vaudeville couple in the show on the Showboat, and then the romantic leads, Steve and Julie. These 8 people live on this boat. These 9 people live on this boat. It's a microcosm of America in 1885. That's 20 years after the Emancipation Act, 20 years after, of course, the end of the Civil War, and a time of great upheaval in America. The backdrop of the story is the Deep South and the changes that it was going through. All of American history at that point suddenly focuses to the boat, because it turns out that this simple, happy family of performers, actually one of the performers, Julie Laverne, who is the leading lady, who is married to Steve, is a negress, which is illegal because it is a case of miscegenation, meaning that a negress married to a white man was illegal at that point in the South, and it was actually illegal in many states until 1957. So that's the tapestry of the story in the background, and once we have this miscegenation case, what happens is this happy family on the boat breaks apart. Julie and Steve get kicked off the boat. Magnolia becomes the leading lady on the boat after being the sweet daughter to Parthy and Andy, and she becomes the leading lady, and she falls in love with Mr. Trouble, whose name is Ravenel. They leave the boat together. They go to Chicago. He abandons her. She's a single mother, the turn of the century. She ends up making a huge career as a Broadway star and goes on to have a very successful daughter performer named Kim. Her parents back on the boat keep life going, but it's never the same. And so this Showboat is really, in many ways, a microcosm of America for 30 some odd years. as well as an amazing story of this young woman's journey from a naive girl on a showboat to a single mother to becoming a star to eventually going back to the boat. And so it's a very powerful story, and if you also read the novel, there's lots of great other stuff. There are many tunes in this musical opera which are familiar to people. Only Make Believe, You Are Love, of course Old Man River, which personifies the Mississippi River, which is constantly flowing through the story. That's it in a nutshell. There are many versions of this musical opera. Kern and Hammerstein, when they wrote it, it was 4.5 hours long. It premiered in 1927 at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York. It was a scandal, a shock, an uproar. There were 100 people on stage. Half of them were African American, half of them were white. That had never happened in New York City. Ever. Ever since then, it's had a rather checkered history. There have been 2 movies. Obviously, we're not doing the 4.5-hour Götterdämmerung version of the musical. We're doing, it's under 3 hours, just so everybody knows, with 1 intermission. But because of that, there are many versions that have had to do with different performers, who's done it, whatever. And so, turning now to us, when we first started the process and knew that we were going to do it, the first place that as a director one goes to for a collaborator is for an existing work is normally the set designer. But in this case, because it was a work that we had to figure out which music we wanted to use, because as I said, there are many options, I turned to my colleague, John DeMaine, and we made a version of the piece that we're doing. Would you love to talk a little bit about that for a second, my dear?
Well, I remember you saying to me that since we're doing it in an opera house, let's make it a vibrant musical score. And so I was looking today at the numbers that were included in 1927, and we actually are doing more. The one number that we are not doing that was in the original 1927 is a vaudeville number called I Might Fall Back on You, which is really superfluous to the plot as we are focusing in on it today. Misery is a number for the African American chorus that presages the bad luck that is going to happen to Julie. And that was removed from the show because it was very long, and but it was interesting that Jerome Kern made sure that it stayed in the piano vocal score. He loved it, and I think it was part of the problem of 4.5 hours. And so we have found a way to include it, and it's a beautiful, beautiful number, and we have it in its entirety. There was a number for Kim when she became a Broadway star that was originally in 1927 a Charleston version of Why Do I Love You? And in 1946 it was replaced by a marvelous number, Nobody Else But Me, which was the last song Jerome Kern composed before he died. And so we have included that because one of the things we get a chance to do today is to try to give you more songs, more music. There's something else too. In the 80s, mid-80s, Houston Grand Opera mounted a production of Showboat, and I received a phone call from a young man who said, "You don't know me, my name is John McGlynn, but my interest is in musical theater, and I'm a sort of music theater collegist, sleuth, if there's such a thing." And he said, "I have access to all of the Rodgers and Hammerstein and archives at the library, and I can get in there. And you don't know this, but when you do Showboat today, and you read it from the library, half of it is 1946, which was a major revival, and half of it's 1927. I can get you all the original 1927 arrangements." And when Hey Fella was not available to us. I mean, if you just rented from R&H, you couldn't get these numbers like Misery and Hey Feller and all of those other songs that Nobody Else But Me, because they weren't published. He found it all. I remember he said, I don't even know this, he said, "I don't want to get paid, I just want room and board." So I went to David Gockley and I said, "I don't know who this person is, but if he delivers, we'll have something special." And he did, and as a result of that, he made the legendary 3 CD recording based on our work that has every song ever composed for any version of Showboat. Not only did he do that, but he constructed full score partituras that you could conduct from. So it has been a fantastic source, and this production will draw 90% on those original 1927 orchestrations. And one that I'm particularly fond of is Old Man River. It has such dignity.
Once we basically worked out the version of what we were going to do, it was also a matter of getting the book, the script right. And so we went to various sources, because again, there are many versions of that. Some are from Edna Ferber, some are from Hammerstein, and so we kind of did a cut and paste, because I thought it was interesting to really follow Magnolia as the protagonist all the way through, which is what we do. And so once we had a version, normally at this point the director starts to collaborate with the designer and choreographer. And so when this script has how many locations, Peter? Use the mic.
About 15.
Right, about 15, which is a lot for any opera or musical, 15 locations. I mean, a lot of times in opera you can get away with something stylized, but in this, it just doesn't work. So what did we do? Tell them a little about our process.
Well, it's also very tricky, because the first half is mainly in the Mississippi on the boat, and we go to various locations on the boat, the stage, the kitchen, as the boat has to make an entrance at the beginning, a very spectacular moment in the piece. But then in the second half, you're into a completely different world of Chicago. So you're solving two huge problems, and how you move from the Palmer House Hotel to the convent to other locations in Chicago is really a kind of problem-solving.
Well, and some of them are historic. I mean, the Palmer House Hotel in Chicago is still there. The great exhibition of 1893, where we chose to open the act, is, there's like people, there's plenty of photographs. And Chicago, as we all know, was, a huge architectural city. It's about buildings, which is the total opposite of a river. And then I think there are a couple other locations in Chicago.
Boarding house.
Oh, the boarding house, right. And then the famous Trocadero bar. It's a lot. So in this kind of piece, not only are we figuring out all the locations, but how we go to and from them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great arts of designing a musical, I think, is not only have you got to make it clear to the audience where we are, but you've also got to work out how to do the transitions from one scene to the next without the audience really noticing. So it's between all of us, really. We all have to solve these problems.
And that over to choreography in some way. When I talked to Michelle about doing this piece, I know, you did a lot of research.
Well, what a rich time in American dance. That span of 40 to 50 years was such an exciting time to research. Dictated so much by music, the music at the time, and what we wore changed so drastically from the 1800s to the 1920s. And that dictated all the movement. We touched on everything from vaudeville, waltzing was big, the march, John Sousa was big at a time, the rag, the shuffle, which is the precursor to tap, cakewalk, buck and wing. The buck and wing is a fascinating background that a lot of people don't know. It actually leads us to the Charleston, which we end the show with, of the 1920s, which most people are familiar with that style of dance. But the buck and wing was made famous by this man named Master Juba. And he was an African-American dancer. And he was from New York, and he lived down in the East Village, and there were some next to the Irish. So there were Irish and there were African-American very close together. And they both influenced the dance, and it was the Irish clogging influenced the way he danced and moved to the jazz music of the day, which became the precursor to tap. And there was an argument going on which came first, the tap or the clogging. depending on who you ask. And we do a version of Master Juba at the Act 1 finale, so all the African-American kids do a version of his style. It's buck and wing. It's a style of dance that led to tap and led to the Charleston. So all these dances back in the day led us to where, I don't know how we got to hip-hop from that, but they all start from...
But that's the genesis of it, isn't it?
That's all the genesis, exactly. Yeah.
And street. I mean, it's the music language that goes with the piece parallels so much of this because we have, and that's why the cast is also a wide diversity of performers. We have opera singers in the roles of Magnolia and Ravenel because it is truly operatic in the sort of sense of Victor Herbert and those sort of great, operettas, but not so late, not like Romberg earlier. Vaudevillians, who are Frank and Ellie, which is a completely different music style. The African American music is gospel and jazz influenced, or it becomes jazz. And then what other music styles we have in there? A lot.
Well, one of the things that we have is the insertion of some popular songs of the day, songs that were not written by Jerome Kern or the lyrics were not by Oscar Hammerstein. We have Bill. The lyrics were by P.G. Wodehouse and then refined by Oscar Hammerstein. We have Goodbye, My Lady Love, which was by neither. And After the Ball, which was like the hit tune in 1900.
Yeah, the number one song that year.
And it gave it it's very interesting. The show originally ended in 1920. It ended in 1927, and the show opened in 1927. So it took it spanned this time right up to the people going to see it. And also inside the show is the old-fashioned way of acting, the melodrama, so that when they put on a show using the acting style called Delsarte, which was all of that, big physical gesture stuff. And there's music.
Which we do in one scene. It's sort of its humor wears off quickly.
And we do the music that goes with that, the sort of...
But I mean, 1927, was a revolution in theater as well, of course. That's when Stanislavski started working in Russia, where we began what we consider naturalistic acting. So up until then, that style of melodrama was acting. All those road shows, all those things that happened in little theaters and opera houses, as we called them across America, were that style. And so it's amazing how just the mid-20s, everything changed. Just a little bit about the orchestration. I'd love you to talk about the fact that we're using the original. And
Right, well, the orchestration, first of all, it's the music, by including Hayfeller and nobody else but me, the music, therefore, has a real journey, so that you hear the latest kind of music in the Charleston, and you start with the more, the operetta stuff almost makes you think of Lehar, because Jerome Kern, had that connection to Europe. So you have all these things going on. Now, the original orchestration called for a separate guitar and a banjo. It actually is not woodwind heavy. It's one flute, one oboe, one bassoon, two horns, and then we have a good brass section, and for us, because we're in an opera house, we have a generous portion of strings, which really just makes all the difference, And the Ziegfeld Theater, those theaters had larger orchestras way back then because the costs
they would have
were
had this size orchestra. I mean,
right.
What you would see here is actually what you would have seen then. I mean, the fact that we have a complete African-American chorus as well as African-American dancers, a Caucasian chorus, Caucasian dancers, and then all the principals, of which you heard the cast was many. It's not one of those, dinky musicals with four principals and, piano and a string quartet. Aside from all that, there are also children in the piece, and there is a pretty big orchestra. So what you're hearing now and seeing is what actually they would have seen almost 100 years ago. And actually, I've always thought the only place that could do that is an opera house.
That's right.
You couldn't do something like this in a commercial setting where you were trying to make money because you would go broke, quite frankly. I mean, to put this many resources behind something. So it's something completely unique and different to see in this kind of setting, and something that I think hopefully will pull off, and everybody will, tell all their friends to come a lot and that sort of thing. And really, this setting here, I think, is ideal. The opera house size is a great size for this piece. It's not too big. The dialogue, and I know somebody will probably ask this in the Q&A, so I'll do it now. We are not miking the singers. When they sing, we are only miking the dialogue, or enhancing the dialogue is the verb that we use nowadays. Just a word about the cast as well, the rest of the cast. We have a unique situation where, because we have 15 performances, we have 2 complete casts of principals. And I think, if you look in your program or online, you'll see it's an amazing variety of performers. Broadway people, opera people, very serious sort of grown-up actors, a real mix of people, which makes this Showboat, a story about people working in the theater, so wonderful to work on, because it is all people in the theater. I'm probably going to turn it over to questions. I'm just wondering if you want to add anything else about the process.
I think what's fun about working in the opera house for me, because I often do musicals in the Broadway and commercial world, is that the dancers have to sing and the singers have to dance, and you're limited in the movement and what you hear. And here, to have a group of opera singers, the chorus, be able to sing, and the dancers be able to dance full out and not have to worry about if they're out of breath and then they have to sing afterward, is such a treat. And I think for all of you, you get a richer experience by seeing the full, which the old Broadway shows used to have the chorus separate from the dancers, but now everything's blended, saving money, and this is just such a treat to really let the dancers, speaking from my point of view, let loose. And I've got this incredible group of dancers who, and hopefully you'll see 2 different varieties of style, where the African American dancers, because they were so enchained with slavery and repression, that their expression is all freedom and loose and free and feeling each other, not with the counts, and living in a whole different world than, say, the Caucasian dancers, which are much more defined by rules, religion, society, and they're much more uppity and clean and upright. And so it was fun to express those different styles freely in this big house.
Question?
I have one little thing.
Yes.
In 1946, the Julie was changed from a mezzo-soprano to a Broadway chest voice, a belt, we call them belters, a low voice singer. And so it's interesting to note that the famous Helen Morgan was actually a mezzo-soprano. And actually Queenie, who in many productions, when Misery was cut, only had to sort of belt her way through the ballyhoo trying to sell tickets to the melodrama, actually in Misery, she has to sing like an opera singer. So the vocal styles, while mixed, carry a significant amount of legit singing with them. I mean, Ellie Mae Chipley, who's the vaudevillian, today her number would be in a lower key. So there was not the same kind of belt that we think of today back in the 1920s. They just sang with different styles, but they sang with a wide range. And so I think that's interesting. And also, what I feel about the version that Cheska has created is that there really is only, I think, 2 moments in the show where there's what I call extended dialogue, where there's no music present, either in underscoring, and so you will feel a real score as you're going through the evening.
I think that's important. I mean, Kern already, Kern, these were 2 good Jewish boys. Come on. They knew, they knew the music of Wagner. They knew what leitmotifs were. Kern, through all of the underscoring, has leitmotifs of the characters going, of the river going. Sounds that if you really just sat and listened to that, it is so well underscored. Just forget the tunes even. It's just that is an amazing part of it. I'd love to say a little bit more about the cast, too. We have some people who you may have seen here before. The leads, the 2 Ravenels, are Rodney Gilfrey and Michael Todd Simpson. The Magnolias, interestingly, one is more of a soprano and one is more of a mezzo, a lyric mezzo. Jennifer Holloway and Andriana Churchman. The Queenies, for those of you who saw Porgy and Bess, are Serena. Angela Simpson is Queenie. and the other Queenie is Gwendolyn Brown, and then the Julie, who is a local, one of them is local, Allison Cambridge, although she's now making a big career everywhere in the world, and she was our first Clara the first time we did Porgy and Bess. And the other is Talise Trevigne. And then what's interesting is we have actors who are the Parthy and the Captain Andy, Cindy Gold and Laura Teeter, and Wynn Harmon. So it's a real grab bag of performers. I'm wondering if people have any questions so far. Yes, sir. I'll repeat the question afterwards. Yes. You've never been to an opera? I'm glad you're here today. Thank you. Don't say that. You're like cutting my heart right now. Okay?
When you say it's the first American opera musical, like I said, I've never been to an opera, but is it distinguished because it's in an opera house?
I think that's a good question. Okay, he's saying, what is the difference between an opera and a musical? That is a question that you're basically asking a question that people ask all the time. Because the Americans, what is our biggest contribution to the world of music? It is jazz, and it is the American musical. Those are the two things that are purely American. What a musical is in many ways what an opera is. It is sung. It's still using what we call 19th century traditions. It is sung. People are singing. People are telling a story. There is an orchestra in the pit. For me, in many ways, there's no difference between the two. That happens in an opera. That happens in a musical. We've evolved musicals in this country to define them basically by using amplification, by using sound enhancement, so that the people who sing musicals usually can't sing opera, and opera singers have very big voices, and often if they're mic'd, it's too much. There are many differences between the two, but there are also similarities. You can argue in both the same way. So I'm really happy that you're coming to see this, and I bet that I will get you to come see something like La Boheme or Carmen. That's why we have, he says he doesn't understand what we're saying. That's why we have the titles above. It's like a foreign film. You have super titles above. And one of the things that I believe in is that we will be doing every year one opera composed in English, or maybe more. Like next year we're doing Moby Dick in English, a new work, but also by taking the standard operas, which are the ones that have been around for a while, one of them being next year The Magic Flute, and performing it in English. Because many of these composers, when they wrote Mozart, who wrote The Magic Flute, he wanted that to be in the vernacular of his audience. A lot of purists get upset about it, but you and I, we're going to be on the same page. I can see we're going to have a long relationship. All right. Yes, sir. We're seeing a dress rehearsal. When are you doing that? Tonight? Oh, okay. All right. This is a piano dress rehearsal. Let's talk about what that is.
That's the first question. The second question is, how do you do that with two cats?
How do you do that? Okay. Tonight you are seeing a piano dress rehearsal. That means 90% of John's work, the orchestra, is not there because you're only hearing the piano. But with a piano, we can stop easily. When there are 50 people sawing away in the pit, the director cannot go, stop, stop, stop. All right? Tonight is our chance to refine everything. So, in other words, Michelle may make some changes in the dance. Peter and Mark, who's not here, the lighting designer, we may make changes in lighting or how scenery moves. I'm sure we'll make some changes in that because we've added some scenery today, actually. And it also is the first time where everyone is in their costumes. And that is always a train wreck because there are 100 people or so on stage, and some people have 8 costumes. Imagine changing your clothes, everything, in less than 30 seconds. That happens a lot in musicals, operas, plays. And so tonight what's happening is more is going on backstage often than is going on in front, because we are working out all of those myriad of details. I mean, if there are 100 people on stage, I can assure you there are about 50 people working backstage. It just takes a lot of people. So what you're going to see is we're going to stumble through the show. We're working on the lighting right now, so it may be dark when you think they're talking about it's a bright sunny day and it's dark up there, because the lighting designers still work. We have another week to work on it. So that's what you will see, and that's you know, it's going to make you want to buy tickets for everybody. Okay. Well, how do you do this with two casts? We do one tonight with one cast and one tomorrow night with another cast. So we've been rehearsing with both casts, or very often I'll be in one room, Michelle's in another room with other people, and John is in another room working with people. I mean, the rehearsal process is basically we rehearse in big rooms, rehearsal rooms like this in Tacoma Park. We lease a building there. We have several big rooms. We rehearse up there with piano for 4 weeks before we come here to the Kennedy Center. Because once you're on stage, it's much more expensive, actually. And that's why the stage rehearsals time is limited. Yes, ma'am. Did we have an open casting call? We already had certain people in mind, but we did, some things were open casting calls, the extras, the kids, the chorus, we do open casting for that. And if you are interested, go to our website and you can audition. Okay? Or your husband, I guess, or, oh, he's your husband. You're with her. Okay, all right. Let me see, remove foot from mouth. Okay, all right. Yes, ma'am. Is there a relationship between Porgy and Bess and this? Absolutely, and it's something, John has conducted Porgy probably 1,000 performances in his life, and we have done Porgy and Bess together. Our production from here that I did, that Peter designed as well, has been in many, many theaters across America, and John has conducted it in many of them, although not here. Although if we do it again here, we'll remedy that. Yeah, I mean, of course, George Gershwin knew this score. He wrote Porgy and Bess in 1936. I mean, there are specific things that he took from here. The song Misery that he refers to is very much like the chorus in Serena's house when they're talking about The Undertaker, and a million other things. Elaborate.
Well, I think that, you know, Gershwin got the idea, he wanted to write an opera using African Americans, and it took about 10 years to get there. So he read the story, and you know, that would be like 1924. So he was very, very much aware of Showboat and this idea of, you know, Showboat in a way, you know, weds the European idea of opera with American vaudeville. And Gershwin went even further by going even further with the American jazz idiom, which he, you know, put into concert context, as we know, as a composer, and using leitmotif and the tricks that make the psychological relationship of the orchestra to the stage in opera what makes something an opera. So, but I think that they all, and Gershwin knew everybody. He knew everything that was going on in music. He was so connected to all the movements that were happening. So,
I mean, you have to realize that anything below 42nd Street from 1925 till the war began was a hotbed of people sharing music and art together. I'm talking about New York City, not Washington right now. I mean, the Gershwin brothers lived in Brooklyn, moved to the Lower East Side, which is where he wrote Porgy and Bess. Then he made a lot of money and he moved to Harlem. I mean, all these people knew each other. They were all talking to each other. They were all connected. The same way that, you know, Rossini talked, the old Rossini talked to the young Verdi. These people knew each other.
Jessica, I think prior to Showboat, the subject matters for musicals were pretty superficial. And even when they were serious, they were handled in a superficial way. So you asked the difference between, one could talk about the difference between opera and musicals. I have my opinion of what the difference is, but I won't bore you with that. But what I think is that opera took on very serious themes, you know, murder, death, seduction, all these things from with pieces like Tosca and all of that. And musicals didn't. So Showboat all of a sudden takes on miscegenation, takes on a really serious theme, and the fact that there's segregation even though there was the Emancipation Act. When the people come on the Showboat, the Africans are upstairs, the Caucasians are downstairs. So there is, this is a very serious issue. Opera does that. So in this sense, when you say Showboat's like the first American opera, it's because it has that giant arc that I think opera has. And Porgy took on, Porgy's like Carmen. If you like Porgy and Bess, you've got to go see Carmen, because Carmen, it's all the arias in Carmen are based on dance, Seguidilla, Habanera, the Gypsy song. And that's what was a model for Gershwin to incorporate these American musical styles in the broad context of a serious theme. And that's what Showboat does, that made it the seminal event that set up, shows like Fiddler on the Roof that have, West Side Story, these shows that have a kind of substance to them, that they may have more dialogue than opera does, but they have that giant arch to it that makes it, makes the boundaries seem not clear between what's
And interestingly, both of those classic musicals draw so much from these kind of pieces. Pay attention when you see the opening number of Showboat, right? The opening number is basically colored folks work on the Mississippi while the white folks play. It's a genre chorus. It tells you where you are. It's exactly like when the Jets are talking about the Jets and the Shark, the first number in West Side Story. It is exactly like when they sing about tradition in the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof. Those are genre numbers that are completely European in their structure for starting a musical the same way as these other pieces, telling you where you are, who you're going to spend the evening with, and that there's going to be a problem. All right? Okay? All right? Okay? All right? Okay? Yes, sir. It's a very busy corner over here. You guys sleeping back there? I'm getting nervous. Tell us where the sets are made. Yeah. No, it's long. Go.
From the moment I kind of start putting a three-dimensional model into a model box, which is to a half-inch to the foot scale, to the actual seeing it on stage, is usually about a year.
We meet, we discuss what it's going to look like. Peter then, I sort of saunter off to a restaurant for a while.
I remember you guys Skyped me from London and said, can you make them dance on this? Is this enough room? Can we do this here? Can you make this transition? Okay,
and
good.
Peter, some designers draw, which is basically useless, because for a director, you really need to see a model. It's like if you've had an addition built to your house, don't read the architect's plans, ask for a model. Peter makes a model in white card, and then we talk about the spaces and how we get from them from one to the other, and then it turns more into art and what does it actually look like.
Yeah, it's two things. First of all, we're trying to create fantastic images for the audience to enjoy, and also we're trying to solve all the problems of this piece, and this piece is enormous. It really is it's a tricky little number.
Where was the set made?
It was made in Adirondack.
Yeah, Adirondack is a scenery building shop located in the Adirondacks, just north of Lake George. Most scenery shops are not in big cities because they need huge volume of space, and they're mostly in, New Paltz, Newburgh, New York, upstate New York, Indiana. They're in places where real estate is very cheap, and where honestly it's true, and there's a group of builders and painters who build them, and then we load it in trucks, and it comes to the various theaters that we're doing it. Oh, thank God, back in the corner. I feel so much better now. Okay.
When you put a show like this together, do you have to select actors who can sing the range as written, or are you allowed to change the key?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's not as sort of religious as opera, where we sort of course, if you're Placido Domingo, he thinks you can sing any aria in any key, because which he keeps. And actually, I think in a way he's right in a way. Composers in the day of opera had a particular. Oftentimes, they were writing for a particular singer they knew, and so the keys would be designed for them. when you look at the Urzer edition of Tales of Hoffmann, which is so interesting to me, Olympia is not in A flat, it's in G. So even there are discrepancies in keys. In Broadway, there's no question, if you have a particular performer in mind, you're going to design keys around that performer. So now you get Showboat, which is orchestrated. Anytime we change those keys, then we have to write out transpositions and all of that. But there's a tradition. I mean, just how low is the bass Joe? When we did, rest his soul, Bruce Hubbard was a wonderful performer who did Old Man River. He was more of a baritone, so we actually did it in D flat. Morris Robinson has Ann Solomon.
Or our two Joes.
Our two Joes.
Solomon Howard is
Howard.
one of our young artists, and Morris Robinson is a guest artist.
They have a real, so we're in that C major where they go down that traditional G that you hear at the bottom of Old Man River. Ravenel has had an interesting history. I mean, Howard Keel is a high baritone. Alan Jones, who made the movie, sang Hoffmanns in France, in Strasbourg, before he was plucked for the movies in Hollywood, and he's a tenor. So I think of the original Ravenel was a sort of kind of Eisenstein baritone, as we sort of call them. But there's no question that Alan Jones was a tenor. So our two leads are baritones. So we adjust, and the different piano vocal versions from 1927 and 1928 have different keys for You Are Love and We Could Make Believe. The lower version and a higher version. So that tradition stemmed right from the beginning. So we adapted, but we're very close to what they heard in 1927, 90% of it.
Yes?
You said that this performance is in collaboration with the there in Chicago.
Yeah.
and other
Theaters, yes, yeah.
And you also mentioned that other performances here have gone on to other
Yeah.
places. So when that happens, when you're collaborating, what changes?
Well, what changes when you take it in different places? You generally you try to make it better. Honestly, you fix things that don't work because you can assess it. You change things depending on the performer. I mean, every performer is different, so you basically want to try and work with who you have to make sure that they work well in what you're doing.
We've done three different versions now.
Yeah, we've done 3 versions, and they've been each a little bit different. So you're seeing the Washington version.
Jessica?
Yeah.
Sets and costumes stay the same, but each opera company has the right to cast, and they'll work with Cheska, but they don't. So the casts don't stay the same. In some instances, they
But
might.
we added scenery here. We have
And you
new.
added
We've
some-
added
yeah.
some. For example, when we were talking about, well, we couldn't afford that before. Now we did okay. So now we've added some new things for here, right? What do we have?
We have a beautiful new sky cloth at the back.
A beautiful sky drop, and we have a gate for the convent.
We have a new convent.
They used to go to kind of an imaginary convent. Now they go to a gate. So when you see the church gate, you'll know what it is.
That's all budget. It's all money. And I don't conduct. I mean, I conducted in Chicago and put the musical show together. But if a company doesn't want me to conduct, has somebody else they want to do it, that can happen with the show too. So, but the constants are the director, choreographer, sets, and costumes.
But we changed songs. We did Goodbye My Lady Love in Chicago and here, but we didn't do it in Houston. And we did Dance Away the Night in Chicago, and now we're doing Nobody Else But Me. So even that hasn't been consistent.
Things ebb and flow. It's like Tristan and Isolde. Do we do the duet in Act 2 or not? Yes. The whole family there. Okay.
I was interested in your very general kind of explanation of difference between opera and musical. I had some other ideas, and you didn't seem to mention one.
I'm sure they're good too. That's a kind of thing that we have, long forum discussions about the difference between opera and musicals.
My impression has been that everything basically is sung in an opera. You have your
No, everything isn't sung in an opera. Magic Flute is an opera. There's a lot of dialogue. Fledermaus, Carmen. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But again, there's no hard and fast rules.
I have a very succinct way of saying
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
And the other thing is that opera, I find the textual
I have a very succinct way of saying the difference.
Okay.
I think that opera is a musical art form that uses theater. I think that musical comedy is a theatrical art form that uses music. And then there are crossovers that air on one side or the other. So you're right in that sense. In other words, at its most ludicrous, you can have people who don't look like the type sing the roles in opera.
But
you can't do that in a musical.
Yeah, but I mean, and this is something to discuss for days. Wagner did not call his works operas. He never used the word opera. He called Parsifal a passion play. He called the Ring Cycle. He called it a Gesamtkunstwerk. He did not like the word opera. So when you invoke his name, I have to say, so this is like a discussion. Okay, so believe me, we can have it one day.
It leads on to my next question.
Okay.
Given you have that sort of thing that they all run together,
Uh-huh.
does that mean in the next couple of years we may end up with our series being half musicals?
No, you won't. We will just be sticking to operas. Okay, what I can see you define as operas, but yes, we'll leave the musicals mostly to the theater, to the producing theater. Okay, I see you're happy about that. Okay, you're going to have to talk to him. Okay, all right. Okay, yes.
So with a piece that's as iconic as Showboat, that
Mhm.
has seen so many incarnations, I'm
Mhm.
curious where each of you sees this particular production fitting into the evolution and maybe, adding something to this that later productions would use. And what do you think would be the pieces that later productions would glom onto?
I don't. She's asking about what would come from this production that other people would use. I think people, people borrow liberally from each other often in the theater, and I don't know. We'll see. After you see it, you'll let me know. And I also think that these works have to speak for themselves, and I don't want to take lightly what you said before, ma'am, because I do believe that it's a big discussion, and it's an important one. But I also think I can see you're already kind of writing this off before you've seen it. So I'd love to talk to you after you see it, or we can have an email discussion. Because okay.
Because you were so general about it, that it leaves in everything open and
All right. Well, how do you feel about like Fledermaus, GNS? So. Okay, good to know. Good to know. How are you feeling about Tristan and Isolde? I know, but look, it wasn't me. I'm just repeating. I'm just, historically accurate. Right. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. I don't want to be in an antagonistic situation. I just, want to make sure that people know there's a range of different ways to describe these pieces. Yes, ma'am.
Well, in this case, I knew...
She's asking about working from different theater to theater.
In this case, we knew which theatres we were going in. So we knew we were going to start in Chicago, we knew we were coming here, and we knew we were going to San Francisco. We didn't know about Houston at the time. So what I tried to do, each one of those venues, does it have a big space on the left side, or does it have a big space on the right side, or does it have a big space at the back? You have to be aware of that. So when you're having to solve the problem of a huge boat coming on the stage, where's it going to come from? If you make it so it comes from the right, and suddenly you've got a big space on the left, you've got a big problem when you move venue from one theatre to the other. So in this case, I decided very early on to keep the boat on the stage the whole time, so that it can play any of the three theatres that we were going to.
But it disappears sometimes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we don't see it all the time.
All right.
It's a trick.
You will wonder, where did they hide the boat? There are certain scenes where you go, where is the boat right now?
Yes.
I was just curious how long it takes to actually stage this type of
How long does it take to stage this kind of production? How far in advance do we start casting? Well, it takes a year to prepare a show, and to rehearse it takes 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. And casting is, sometimes it's a year in advance, sometimes it's a week before you start. You never know. People get other jobs, they get a TV show, they get a movie, La Scala calls them and they call you up and say, would you let me out of my contract? Theater is definitely a game of chance. Yes.
I know that most of the dancing is performance dancing, but are we going to get a hint of what the public was dancing in these 4 decades?
Are we going to get a hint of what the public was dancing?
The public was dancing the waltzing. We have waltz numbers, and we have and some cakewalk. The public did cakewalk, and Charleston, but I think probably the most common would just be the waltzing.
Yes.
Given the complexity between the set, the orchestra, the actors, the singers, the dancers, who has overall fiduciary responsibility for this? And then what's the interplay between the business people and the artists?
Another long discussion. What's the interplay between the business and the artistic folk? Well, basically, it's like balancing your checkbook, okay? Which everybody in this room does very well, right? Okay? When we start out, I know what the budget is. That it costs this much we have this much to build the set and costumes, we have this much artistic, and I'd like to introduce, actually while he's here, who works with me artistically, this is Andrew Jorgensen back here, who's the head of artistic planning now. So in something where you were asking about casting, where a lot of this was cast a year ago, but some of them we cast the week before we started. So Andrew has the job of, we come up with a list of people, we say, oh, they're too expensive, or oh, they're a good price, they're not good anyway, so how can we balance this person with that? So we have to be very responsible financially. I think it's important that we operate in the black and that we are responsible to our budget. It's the director, it's the director, but along with the executive director, in this case, Michael Mayle, and of course our Uber boss is Michael Kaiser. And Michael Kaiser and our affiliation with the Kennedy Center, which is a wonderful, wonderful marriage, I think, that we are part of this august institution. We have a certain budget the same way the symphony does, the jazz festival, the ballet, and we work within our financial parameters. And if we don't, we get in big trouble. And of course, we have to project how much money we might make from ticket sales. It's a balance of earned income and of course contributed income. Let me just underline that, contributed income. And then, for example, we are currently working on the set for next season's Verdi's opera, The Force of Destiny. I like that one. You should go. You should go. And I hope how are you feeling about Verdi over there, okay? You feel good about Okay, good. We have a lot of Verdi coming up, okay? Of course, in the fall is the bicentenary of the birth of Verdi and Wagner. And so we are working on the set now for The Force of Destiny. So Peter's sort of not speaking to me today because I said we have to cut some more out of the set to make it work financially.
Another very tricky piece, too.
So we believe me, every penny, can we have another hour of dance rehearsal? No, we can't afford it. It's
Well, can I have another 5 dances?
Yeah. So we are working actually on the set right now, and it's going through a lot of changes. So it's a constant, and it really is. I'm sure many of you have built an addition here, or redone your house. That's what it's like, and it's like you can't trust that contractor, right? Okay. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Last couple of questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, can I just ask you about the genius of Jerome Kern's music? We spoke about transpositions, but what was originally written, 40 years, 50 years gone by, and in terms of updates, is there any temptation to have updated arrangements?
Is there any temptation of updated arrangements? Not from my part, and nor from John's.
What we're doing is we're doing a Valentine to the original. Actually, the Hal Prince production that was on Broadway, the last Showboat, Bill Braun did a whole new set of orchestrations, and I think they were quite brassy, quite loud, quite heavy. Everything was mic'd. we are doing, this is like, it's an operetta, you know, I mean, the first American opera, but I mean, in its form, it's like an operetta, where the lyricism of the music belongs in the opera house. And we want to do it in a way that is appropriate for the opera house. We don't need to, and Jerome Kern, in a way, was like the American Schubert. I mean, he gave us such wonderful songs. The melodies of these songs are just so beautiful. And I think that the whole idea of getting these, it's fascinating to me that Robert Russell Bennett was the orchestrator in 46, and he was the orchestrator in 27. And in 46, he orchestrated in the style of the decade. He didn't make an effort to match 27, 100%. So that's why I say, to have the original Old Man River is so, it's like Beautiful Dreamer. I mean, it has this folk, earthy, but simple. And in the 40s, the strings are swooping away, you know, while they're singing Old Man River. It just was what they were doing in the decade. So I think that to have the music match the period is, a lot of times what we do on Broadway, for example, Kiss Me Kate got a big revival and a big rewriting. And it was interesting because when you heard it, the music sounded 40s, but it was our late 1900s, you know, 2000 idea of what the 40s were like arched. So, but if you go to the original Cole Porter orchestrations, they're pretty square. In fact, I was really glad they did that with Kiss Me Kate. But I think Showboat is beautiful. From a reaction to everybody since we've been doing this, you know, in Chicago, it's so beautiful to hear the original orchestrations played by a big orchestra so that they sound. That's the secret.
I think I see we're at time probably, so I really want to thank you all for coming. I guess you're going to the rehearsal.
I have some
but
instructions.
But that's not for a while. Where can you sit? I'm going to you're in charge of this, I feel. Okay, what? Okay, come on.
First, thank you to Francesca and Michelle and John and Peter. Are all of you planning to attend the piano dress this evening? Excellent. So
go have dinner first or something, right?
Exactly.
It's not till 7 o'clock.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they won't be ready to seat you. We're going to clear this area after this session, and they'll start seating for the piano dress at 6:30. And you need to retain your ticket from this event so that you can be admitted to the piano dress. Between then and now, please go enjoy some dinner, Millennium Stage, and you'll be seated in the first tier.
It's pretty good seats in the first tier. Okay. Thank you so much,
Thank you all for
everybody.
coming.
And I hope we'll do this more. Thank you. Thank you very much.